Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirit Coffee Talk this week. My name is Elyse. I'm joined by Ginette and the lovely Lisa. The gang's all here again this week, which is lovely. How are you ladies doing? How's it going?
Good.
Good.
Mercury retrograde ends today. Woo! Mercury's out of the microwave.
I know.
It feels like I'm like waking up, like, oh, like it's peeking out of the dark.
I feel foggy this morning. Like I feel like my eyes are not fully open. I'm like,
I said that to Ginette. I'm like, it has taken me so long to wake up this morning.
Out of the fog. It's funny, when we were pulling cards before, this fell out of the deck.
Oh no.
Oh really? Totally feels foggy.
Yeah. So we were chatting beforehand and I brought up that, and we were kind of having a grander conversation about all the things that are going on in the world, and that there's been a real theme for me in both readings this week, as well as coaching clients around looking around the world, all of the things. It seems like it's just another thing and another thing and another thing that's happening on collective global scales, that I find myself included. I'm catching myself doing this, looking around and being like, what's happening? Like, it feels like we're having these communications with people that maybe have opposing opinions, or we're really passionate about certain opinions or stances. And it's like, everybody's speaking a different language almost.
Yeah.
And it feels like there's this real separation happening, which I think, for what I'm seeing in a lot of my clients, is it's bringing up a lot of fear, because it's like, what does this mean? Where are we going? Like, I thought things were supposed to clear up and get better. And as the heavy stuff comes to light, we find resolution and we move forward and we heal. And a lot of folks, I feel like, don't feel like that's happening just yet. And I think it's creating a lot of like panic and worry and uncertainty, where we've already had a lot of uncertainty in the last couple of years. So from our human sense, that's hard to handle. It's hard to hold. So curious what you guys are finding.
Well, just to pop in here real fast, I think it's causing like a split reality, essentially. Like we're starting to notice this split reality of like, how does that kind of consciousness make sense to somebody if we are evolved, versus why wouldn't this idea of consciousness make sense? And there's enough of that happening in enough polarizing situations to start causing that sort of split reality. And then that trickles down into so many finite situations of what that looks like, whether that be timeline jumps, consciousness shifts, all that kind of stuff. But I think what's happening is people are really noticing this split in reality. That's my 2 cents. How about you, Lisa?
Can you dive into that a little bit more, Ginette? To like, okay, so for us, this really makes sense, split reality and the dualities of things. But for a lot of people, I don't think it does, because I don't think there's even like a common expression for it amongst like day-to-day conversation, right? Like I think a lot, especially people I've talked to, there's people who are like, they're waking up to something, or looking in, or feeling differently, or taking part in different types of conversations than they've ever taken, and like question things, or been like, that's really interesting. Whereas maybe even a couple months or a year or whatever to ago, that would have never even been on their radar. It was like, words and conversation that has never even come up. And then all of a sudden it comes up, and instead of them being like, oh, that's crazy, being like, oh yeah, where all of a sudden it's resonating. And I think from like the conversations that we can have, and like what I'm used to talking about, or like terminology that I'm used to, I can say, oh, well, you're probably evolving into more of a fifth dimensional consciousness. You're taking part in this big shift or this energy awakening, where people will be like, what are you talking about? What does that even mean? Right? So can you like dive in to make it maybe a little more simplistic for people to understand what this shift actually is?
Yeah, let me draw it. I'm gonna draw
awesome.
Okay, so it's to do with like dimensional consciousness, and that all happens when our idea of how things work starts to change. So to make it really simple, like a 3D consciousness is when something has to fit in a box, right? Like this is the way it is. It's kind of more black and white thinking, okay? Fourth dimensional consciousness is when we start to think like, it doesn't have to be a box, does it? Like this shape, we could actually bend it here because it's actually more malleable. So this is when someone starts thinking beyond black and white into the idea of shades of gray. They're like, but what about, or what if? And they may not even be instigating those thoughts, but they're starting to open up to those thoughts being presented from people, right? Like someone that's like, well, maybe it's not this or this. What if it's that in the middle? And they're like, oh. So 40 is when people are starting to really embrace or conceptualize something different than the norm. And we could even use science, for example, is that where science is starting to break into concepts of changing the narrative around what is a black hole, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a black hole very well may be portals to other universes versus a place where anything that goes into there is destroyed and that's it.
Yeah.
Right? Or like you can't bend time. Here is like, well, actually, we think time does bend in space, right? So this is where you can't quite explain why, but you're starting to think outside the box. 50 consciousness, though, is when you bend it all the way and you realize there's a duality to it, a masculine, feminine, a light and a dark. It's not just light or dark, or I'm really not sure, but something's bending. You're like, there is a light and a dark. And we have to embrace that duality of thought. And that's when we start to have like more compassion for people, for situations, even though we may say, personally agree with let's just use green and yellow, okay? We might be like, I'm yellow all the way, that's just my morals, but I can hold space for green. And I can hold space because green feels this, and I can understand that from their perspective, but I'm still here, right? And then if we want to take that even further to 60 consciousness, is essentially when we have the blending of the two, where the duality actually merges into a realization that it is entirely wholeness, right? And that's I think going higher than where humanity is going at this point. I think humanity is really stepping into embracing a lot of 5D consciousness. Doesn't mean there aren't people here. So please let me be very clear. There are probably many here, but I think what a lot of this reality split that's happening is you're having people that can truly see this, and then people that can only see the one or the box. And so what happens is when you start to be able to see the two sides, you start to be able to see the difference between the two-dimensional consciousness, right? And an example of that could be even the view of time. So someone who lives here, time is linear and that's it. Somebody lives here can see that time sometimes can speed up, time can jump, deja vu
Overlap. It can overlap.
All that kind of stuff. So every time we shift our level of consciousness, we open up to so much more in what's going on.
Yeah, I love that. That was a really great way of explaining it. Thank you.
One of the things that's been coming up for me a lot in the last, I would say, year or two, because specifically with a lot of like social issues and things like that, I'd get very passionate about them, and I'd have a hard time being like, how can you think opposite of that? How can you, like, you know, it just was like my brain couldn't comprehend. How could you think anything different than XYZ? How could you think anything different than green? And one of the things that's come up for me a lot in the last couple of years, and they're just reminding me of it now, is one simple way to support yourself in shifting towards that 5D, being able to see both sides, is paying attention to the reaction, the really strong reaction that you're having, because it's probably rooted in something. And not that it's wrong, but just to pay attention to it and seek to find what's underneath. And before saying, no, you're wrong, ask the question, like, where might they have learned that from? Where might that understanding have come to them? Where might they have along their journey been taught or told? Because really, 95% of our belief systems are from those around us, society, families, et cetera, where might they have been taught that yellow is better than green? Yeah. I don't have to agree that yellow is better than green, but can I seek to understand that maybe they grew up in a space where yellow was the only way, and that was drilled into them from a very young age? And so can I, while still holding my beliefs very strong, hold space for where they might be coming from, and still pushing to, and not, I don't even like the word pushing, but still for me, an important role in my life is having those conversations and encouraging maybe different thoughts. But even in social issues, I follow both sides of the equation because I want to know what the other side is saying and I want to seek to understand. And so I think it's like the bridge is just seeking to understand that which you don't get. And even if it makes you really angry, that's okay, because that's, your emotion, but can we just seek to understand differently or what's different than us?
I love that. That's beautiful. And that's so true. Truly. Yeah. And I think that's what a lot of people are being, I will say, pushed, invited, energetically forced into asking themselves with the polarizing topics, ideas that are whirling around and like events of things that are happening is why is this, right? What is the reason for this? And when we can hold that space, then we're holding that higher 5D consciousness. And sometimes we're going to hold it really well. And sometimes we're going to fall down. Like yesterday, I was driving with my son home from dropping my daughter off at dance. We're having this great conversation. I'm at a stoplight and I have the turning signal to turn left, but the car I see coming this way isn't slowing down. So I'm not going to go. Obviously, if my son's in the passenger seat, he would be right in the line of being hit. Obvious, right? This guy behind me in this big black truck is laying on the horn with all kinds of hand gestures and stuff. And I found myself instantly like root right into 3D and wanted to be angry because it was like, don't you dare judge me. I got my son in the car and I got this and this and this. I was so like, and then as I was driving away, I was like, holy, where did that come from? It's like, that wasn't a higher perspective of like, he doesn't understand my reason and it really doesn't matter. And I chose the safe thing. Like that would be that higher piece. So I had to ask myself, like, where is that coming from? Right? And kind of figure that out and why am I triggered and whatever. And so I say that because we don't always have to hold that high frequency with perfection. Like being human, we're going to ebb and flow based on our emotions. If we're hungry, if we're tired, if, I don't know, maybe we don't like black trucks. I don't know. So I think that's important to know too, and to,
yeah, because once, like, if you're living in, generally speaking, a fifth dimensional consciousness in your being, in your life, in your choices, in your like where you resonate. I mean, we still live in a third dimensional world where it isn't completely separate yet. Yeah. We think that's the direction it's going, but like it's not, right? It's not. And so it's almost impossible not to be able to be pulled into it. Like we get pulled into 3D perspectives on the daily. Like it would be nice to go and sit in fifth dimensional frequency 24/7 on a mountain meditating. Like that'd be lovely. And we can go through ebbs and flows where we hang out here more or whatever. And like sometimes like we're going through moves and sales and stuff. It's like I have to go into third dimensional frequency because I have to do this, right? And that's fine. It's not like it's us saying like the goal is to always stay here because that's better, right? That's another part of fifth dimensional frequency, is that there is no better or worse. It's not like that. But to have patience with ourselves, because sometimes we get pulled into it. And sometimes we can walk into a social group or even a room or something like that where it's like instantly you feel yourself, your frequency being pulled down into more of a density, because that's the energetic frequency of the room. Right? When you're like, whoa, I'm going to have to either step back or I'm going to have to work at this, or I have to like filter this because holy, I'm feeling like, it almost goes there faster than it does to be able to pull out of it. Do you know what I'm saying? So like having patience with yourself and knowing that interactions that you have are going to be up and down, right? Like, does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, and dare I say, I think it's necessary. I think that's how you learn and evolve and grow, because if you're always just like, la, 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 and not that that's 5D, but that's kind of how my brain like compartmentalizes it, that it's like, there's no light without dark. There has to be the duality, because that's where we learn, through the challenges, through the hardships, through I just lost my shit on my dogs because I'm really, really taxed and stressed. And like that overreaction was not necessary, but it's telling me something about where my emotional state is currently. I am overtaxed. So it's all, that's where the lessons lie. If everything was, kind of floating and that kind of positive all the time, I think you would miss out. It would eventually edge into a bit of a facade, which in and of itself means it's not in that fifth dimensional consciousness.
Right. It's not integrating both. Right. Yeah. It's not integrating both. And the resistance is a lot of time where it comes up, right? Is the resistance to something, or the resistance to change, or when somebody's really triggering you, it's like, okay, what are you resisting about this person or this situation or this understanding, right? Yeah. But this kind of comes into like what we were talking about last week when, okay, so if we want to find a place where we're comfortable, where we reside in that higher kind of frequency without using labels of third or fifth or fourth or whatever, but just where we feel comfortable with our frequency, right? We were talking about last week, that can look very different in how we've been kind of invited to bring ourselves outside into a bit more playfulness. And, like it doesn't have to be serious, right? And so it's like where we can find where we're comfortable in the frequency in which we reside. So I am the most comfortable either in like quiet meditation where I'm doing my cards and like that, or like just play. Like I like playing. I do. That's magic to me. I love the art of playing because that's where I feel my frequency at its highest and most, and when I kind of get pushed into what I am more uncomfortable with, a more of a dense frequency, is when I get like, when I'm not balanced, when I get frustrated, or when I get irritated or triggered or whatever, where I have to stop and be like, okay, what's the deal? But I'm still human, right? But it's just figuring that out.
Yeah. So I want to add something with what we were talking about a bit before. So I bring the whiteboard back. So this is kind of like that 5D consciousness of recognizing the two parts. What we can start to do too here is, even with like the spiritual journey, like Lisa, you were mentioning before, with the spiritual journey, and like say we identify this as us and this is other, and other can be other people, but this can also be spirit, guides, goddesses, ascended masters, light beings, other. What we can also do then is step it up one other notch and realize we are all connected, right? Like when we're judging someone else, we're judging an aspect of us that is triggered in that something else, right? Just as when we perceive spirit to be better than, or we're always looking to spirit to tell us the answer because they are the light to our dark, or whatever that may be. When we start to embrace that we are all entirely connected, like everything is connected, we are spirit, we are source energy, we are all of that, we can start to work in this greater energy of harmony, which makes for way more manifestation, greater ease of being, and like so much more compassion and understanding when we can start to put ourselves in the position of the other and realize it's one and the same. Yeah. So I just wanted to add that.
Oh, you're muted, Lisa, or I can't hear you all of a sudden.
Can't?
Oh, there we go.
I can.
Sorry. Sometimes I feel like that's why there is the big triggers, because when we're being reflected back to us about something that either we're subconsciously not comfortable with about ourselves, or that we resent about that person because we don't give ourselves permission to do it, or a part of ourselves that we didn't give a voice to, or that was taken away from us at a young age, and we see somebody else embracing it freely, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, like that's what the triggers are. And I think, I was having this conversation with my daughter, actually. She's 14 and extremely wise beyond her years. And she's saying, Mom, I used to really get annoyed by things that people would do. And now she's like, I think most times I can identify what it is about them that's triggering me, about like what it is on myself. So that way you just, once you understand it, you become way less frustrated, because it's like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder what it is about them that's triggering me. And then you go in and give yourself space when you make it about that part of yourself that is being reflected back to you. Because I mean, as cliche as it sounds, it's never about the other person. And same with somebody's reflecting to you and like making you feel terrible. you want to think like, oh my gosh, right? Like what it is me, but it's never. It's never about you. It's always about how that person, or if we get triggered, if that person's triggered, it's the reflection back to you because we all are one. And so what is it about them that really is triggering me? It's not them. They're just them. They're here to be them, just like we're here to be us, right?
I pulled that exact card this morning when we were chatting before we started recording, was the mirror card.
Really?
Yeah, like exactly that. I'm like, oh, I'm not sure where we're going with that. Ta-da!
One thing that you kind of said, Lisa, that I really agree with, and I just kind of want to like name or almost label it, is that I think sometimes, I know this was really a challenge for me when I started hearing the word like, your triggers are just a mirror of the other person. And I'm like, I took that very literally as like, I want to do what they do, or I want to believe what they believe. And I saw it as like, it's a direct reflection. But what I kind of heard in your words, Lisa, was that sometimes it's not the exact same thing. Maybe if it's like, oh, I love Lisa's shirt, and that triggers me somehow, I want that shirt then. It could mean that, oh, I wish I felt comfortable wearing something that felt really good for me that maybe feels outside of my comfort zone. Or maybe there was, my dad had a shirt like that and it really triggered me because I miss him a lot and my grief flared up. Like it's not always the exact opposite.
Oh, totally.
Which I used to take very literally and be like, I don't get it. That doesn't make sense to me. But it's reflecting back something within you. So it might not be the mirror image, but it's the mirror within you of what is the root of this thing. And that's where the digging comes in. That's where the work comes in, and where the questioning of like, what is it that's causing me to react in this way? And again, that doesn't mean that we have to accept, awful things happening in the world and just being like, well, it's just for me to work on. Like, if you're called to activism, if you're called to, making change in the world, then do it, right? But do it from a place of understanding where your anger and triggers and the strong emotions that you have come from it, because you make change in a greater way from a grounded place. The anger can facilitate that, or the frustration can facilitate that. But I think sometimes the anger and the frustration takes over everything, and the real messages and the real change get kind of lost in all the yelling. So it's like, if we could all just step back on both sides, on yellow and green, and say, what is it within me that is causing this strong reaction? Let me look at that, and then let me take steps forward to help shift and evolve and make change.
Totally. You know where I always go to, I feel like this is interesting, because then all of a sudden I'm like, okay, if I'm like stepping back and like looking in when I get triggered, or when I'm really like affected by social injustice or something like that, where I always go to, I don't know if everybody does this, but I always go to, I wonder what went down when they were developing in a young age to make them develop this belief system. So it could be physical, emotional, like lessons, like everybody comes from something, right? And so I always go to their little self. So if there's someone that is like evil, or they're doing evil thing, whatever, it's not me justifying their actions, but what I'll do, because that's where I go to make the change. I don't use my voice and like activate that way, generally speaking, unless I'm doing it for kids. But I'll go and I'll like almost like intuit their inner child, their younger self, the part of their spirit that learned this, and I'll like go straight to this, like, and try to just give them the nurturing love energy straight to their heart as a little one, because I believe that all things being energy, that is not lost. That is not lost energy. That's just where I go to the little one, and everybody goes to places that are different, right? But I feel like I always go to the little child that learned that somehow, or was hurt, or developed a belief system based on something. And I don't need to understand it or try to change that. I just go straight into the love of the little baby.
I think that's really good, because again, it's like going to the root of something. And whether it's the root of somebody else's something or your own something, that's what Spirit keeps asking people to go back and find, whether it was through the waterfall of beginning of COVID, right? Going over the waterfall, churn in the waters below, find the root of the reasons why you're moving forward, why you're held back, why are you passionate, why this, and this. And so I think that's a really good thing, because it's in the roots of the things we can find the understanding, and then better consciously choose what we're doing in our next steps moving forward.
Totally.
For for others.
Because we're all here to do different things, right? Like we're all here to hold a frequency, but we're here to do different things. And so that's going to be manifested very differently, physically, mentally, spiritually, all of it. The more space we can make for each other's frequency in their path and their journey, the easier it is to have that, energy exchange. It's not so rigid. It's not so this versus that. It's like being able to maneuver your way through these different energetic frequencies because we're all open enough to be able to have that exchange, you know?
Yeah.
I think that's the goal. And that is more of that fifth dimensional, right? Or sixth, right? Because it's all about this interaction, this like exchange, right?
I'm just feeling called to kind of loop back to, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, what is time, doesn't matter, where we were talking about like June and how there's really a call to resting, recharging, connecting to playfulness, coming back to ourselves. And I got to say, I had every single reading I've done this week had at least one card that was either refuge, retreat, recharge, self-care, leadership, which I pulled refuge, patience, leadership this morning.
Wow.
Which I laughed. It was like, that's exactly the same thing over and over and over again for every single person, to the point where I was like, am I making this up? But there was such a theme of like person after person after person. And then here we are. But the way that we have the energy and the resilience, because I think a lot of people would say like, I'm sorry, the world is exhausting me. I don't have the energy right now to like deep dive into my emotional state, because I feel that way presently. Like I am exhausted. I've come out of a very, very busy, tense stretch, but June like randomly cleared up for me and I'm going on vacation, which I don't think I've ever gone on vacation in June in my life. So all to say that I really feel like, yes, we're being called to this self-inquiry, and yes, that is part of how we evolve. But the way that we hold space and energy for that is to create space, to rest, to have playfulness. Like we're not saying self-reflect all day, every time you're triggered, because sometimes that's just, you don't have the emotional space for that. And that's totally okay. The triggers will stay, don't worry. They'll be there and pop up again another time when you feel like you might have more space for it, but still don't lose the message of rest and recharge and deep replenishment.
Literally what just came out.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So don't throw that out the window for June, everybody. Still rest and charge and take care.
There's a reason that it's like June, like you trust the way things line up, I guess, and I was saying really trust the cycles of things too, because all of a sudden the sun is coming out. Like the sun's coming out for the first time in like a long time. And there's so much about being recharged by those rays. It really is. Even if you don't need to understand it fully, and there's no like perfect way to explain it. Just trust that those sunlight, those rays are doing way more about the light activation in your physical, emotional, spiritual body than you can even put down on paper or understand in a measurement tool. You know what I mean? It's just trust that there's a bunch of recharging that you can do in the sun.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have any cards that popped out for everyone before we finish up here?
That one was for me. She keeps coming. This one jumped out about 3 times. I showed it to you before we even. So this is a light activation, and Sanat Kumar is such a strong source. But this is light activation. Shine your light. Your internal guidance is coming through loud and clear. So I don't know. I think we're talking about light activation. I really see that. Yeah. And I see that as like shining your light, about being able to align with your frequency and wear it like you're proud of it, like if something resonates or if something doesn't, where you're guided to or where you want to be or stay or change. It's like, that's yours. You got to come in with your frequency, with your body, with your soul. You got to come in to live this life. Like that's your job, is to be you. Yeah. And so it's like, wear your frequency or wear your energy with pride. Oh, by the way, happy Pride Month. Yeah, we didn't say that. Happy Pride Month. Yeah, right. Yes. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's just like, that's what's coming through so much for me as a general message for anybody listening, and I think specifically for the people who are listening, is about wearing your energy with such pride, because you came in, you chose it on another level to come in and be this light and have this and experience. We didn't come in to be stagnant. We came in to grow and to learn. And it's like, wear that with pride,
Mhm.
because you're shining it. And so it's like, find that energy exchange, wear it, release it, do whatever you need to do within yourself, instead of, not instead of, but maybe seeing where the parts of yourself is desiring something different, or really holding on to something that happened or that you want to happen. It's like, I'm just going to just be in this and see where it guides me, and owning that, whether it can be a tough moment or a joyous moment, without judgment at all. It's just the moments,
Mhm.
although that's cliche to say, but it's true.
No, that makes sense. I also like too quickly how the card talked about following your internal guidance, because that was a big message for Spirit through the month of June with the whole time reset. And they're like, we're going to be a little less interactive. So follow your internal guidance, connect into the sun, connect into Gaia, but listen to self. So
Mm,
um, I think that's really quite timely.
I love that.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's all we have for today then.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening. We truly appreciate each and every one of you. Do check out avalonspirit.com if you're looking to connect with us, as well as different offerings we have on there. And also check out the Avalon Spirit Facebook group if you haven't already. We are on there regularly, interacting, chatting about different things. So check that out. And we will see you guys again next week.